The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. A gentle, immersive retelling for bedtime. Listen now, and let your mind settle into the soft rhythms of an old London night, where gas lamps glow like warm, watchful stars, and the hush between the streets holds secrets the city prefers to keep. I will take you down quiet lanes and into the calm voice of a household, and we will walk together through a story that is, at once, mysterious and human. This is the tale of Dr. Henry Jekyll and the other self that haunted him, Edward Hyde, as it might be told around a fire, with the urgency of curiosity softened by the slow pulse of compassion. Begin by picturing a man named Gabriel John Utterson, a lawyer of steady habit and temperate life. He was not given to easy laughter, but there was an inner warmth in him, a reliable compassion that showed itself most in small, deliberate acts. He tended his affairs with care and read the law as others might read scripture. On Sundays, after a plain meal, he would sit by his fire with a serious book until the chiming of the neighboring church marked time for sleep. He liked things in order and liked people to be left to their own troubles when they could manage. Yet, even as he trusted people to live their own lives, he would often be the last respectable hand offered on the downward way. He had a long-standing acquaintance and a quieter friendship with a man named Richard Enfield. They walked together each week, not out of great companionship of conversation, but because their shared ritual steadied them both. One evening upon such a walk, their way took them down a narrow by-street with neat shop fronts. The square of light from each bright window gave the lane a tidy, inviting air. 2 doors along, the paint and polish suddenly broke. A 2-storied block thrust a blank, weathered face onto the lane. No window opened there, only a single, battered door with no bell or knocker, its wood swollen and worn from many careless touches. Some people thought it an odd place, for in that dull, neglected entry, tramps would shelter, schoolboys would carve curiosity into the frame, and children would play upon the highest step. It was a little island of neglect in a tidy street. Enfield, with the slow amusement of a man who has seen much and keeps stories tucked away, pointed to that door and told Utterson a memory. He recalled a black winter night when he had seen a small man step on a child as if crushing an insect with cool and terrible indifference. The little girl cried, and a crowd gathered. The man seemed neither particularly fierce nor plainly vicious. Rather, his face struck everyone with an unnameable wrongness, a feeling of deformity that began beneath the eyes and lived in the way people shifted their bodies at his presence. Enfield and others threatened to make a scandal vanish the man's reputation, and the man met their fury with a mocking calm and offered to pay a sum of money. He took them to that worn door, produced from within a check and a little gold, and bade them be satisfied. The check proved to be genuine, and the night's strange business passed into a kind of rumor that lodged in the minds of the two friends. The name of the small man, Enfield said, was Hyde. It was a name that would echo in Utterson's thoughts, for he was the lawyer to one Henry Jekyll, and the will of his friend contained an unsettling clause. In the event of Dr. Jekyll's disappearance, all his possessions were to pass to a certain Edward Hyde. At first, Utterson thought the provision an eccentricity. He took care of legal documents with a quiet pride and had a natural distaste for the irrational. Yet there, folded in his safe, rested the will that named Hyde beneficiary. It pricked his curiosity and troubled his steadiness. That night, Utterson walked to his friend Dr. Lanyon, a man of science and hearty manner. Lanyon had once been close to Jekyll, but 10 years of a difference in ideas had cooled the friendship. When Utterson asked about Hyde, Lanyon declared he knew nothing of the man. Still unsettled, Utterson returned to his plain house and to his bed, but his sleep was thin. He turned the details over in his mind, and in the darkness, odd pictures came to him. The little man walking through lighted streets and crushing life as though he had no soul, the life of Jekyll, a respected physician, sleeping peacefully, unknowing, and something that seemed to stand between them like a wrong shadow. Utterson could not rest with the blankness of a name and a clause. He took it upon himself to watch the strange doorway in that by street where Enfield had last seen Hyde. For nights he sat and waited, allowing the patience of his calling to steady him. Then, one fine, cold evening, under lamps steady as the metronome of the town, his patience found its reward. A small man came across the street and slipped a key into that battered door. Utterson stepped out and touched him on the shoulder. The man, Hyde, shrank as if at a touch, and then preserved a coolness that did not belong to his small, restless figure. Utterson introduced himself as friend of Dr. Jekyll. Hyde answered, low and guarded, and when the lawyer asked to see his face, it was as if he hesitated on a secret. For a moment, their eyes met. There was in Hyde's look an odd combination of cowardice and something still more chilling. He gave a Soho address and disappeared into the house, leaving Utterson with a heavier heart than he had come with. In Cavendish Square, Jekyll's home, Utterson knocked at the doctor's door and found a house of taste and comfort, a place of oak cabinets, a bright fire, and a room that one might call the most pleasant in all London. He let himself be admitted by the solemn household servants and read the flicker of anxiety on faces that had seen many things. Poole, Jekyll's man, was composed but respectful in his answers, and hinted that Mr. Hyde had a key and came often to the laboratory at the back. Utterson left with the familiar worry of a man who finds his friend in the company of something that has no claim on him. Weeks later, Jekyll invited a small circle to dinner, a quiet, tasteful gathering in which the doctor seemed his old self, open-faced, content, and plainly fond of his visitors. Utterson contrived to remain behind and spoke to Jekyll of that uncomfortable will and of Mr. Hyde. For an instant, Jekyll's face fell, shadow gathered there, and he urged Utterson to leave the matter alone. he promised, with a sincerity Utterson could not doubt, that he would soon be rid of Hyde. He spoke of his ability to put an end to the relationship as if he were turning off a tap. Utterson, a man of trust, promised to protect Hyde's rights should their master demand it, even if his own instincts recoiled at the name. Then one still October night, a crime split the calm. A beloved and venerable man, Sir Danvers Carew, was found in a lane cruelly and senselessly beaten. A young maid saw a frail gentleman and a small, furious man pass in the moonlight. The small man struck, and the kindness and standing of the injured man did not save him. The streets filled with whispers. When the police brought the broken stick, Utterson recognized it. It was one he himself had once given to Jekyll. The town called for vengeance, and the police searched Hyde's rooms. They found not the chaos one expects of a criminal's den, but a strange, luxurious neatness. A small, neat suite, silver and plate, a picture on the wall, and a heap of ashes where papers had been burned. It looked like a life that had been suddenly deserted. More startling still, a sealed letter addressed to Utterson lay among the victim's papers. The bank found several £1,000s in the man's account, which made it clear that the motive had not been robbery. The covered, senseless fury of the act set a different, deeper fear running under Utterson's calm. Hyde had been linked with Jekyll's name. The name was more than a curiosity now. Utterson hurried to the doctor's house and found Jekyll pale but resolute. Jekyll declared he was done with the man. He insisted he was safe, and that the letter which had been sent would prove that there was a way of escape. Utterson took custody of the letter, and despite the doctor's urgency that it be left to quiet sleep, kept it in his own mind as he weighed his warnings. Gradually, for a time, it seemed as though Hyde had vanished. The world breathed a little easier. Jekyll came back into society, made friends, and did good deeds. For months he lived as one might hope he would, charitable, gentle, and at peace. The anxious watches of Utterson eased. If there is consolation to be taken in the hospitality of such a life, it was here. Yet the peace did not hold. One January, Dr. Lanyon, once a close friend, but now estranged by differences of scientific taste, fell gravely ill and then died. He left behind him an envelope for Utterson, marked for the lawyer's eyes alone, and to be opened only upon certain conditions. Utterson, respectful and bound by his oath, sealed the packet and set it aside. It would remain a quiet, heavy presence in his thoughts. Then came a Sunday when Utterson and Enfield once more chanced upon the by-street. The windows of the laboratory were dark, except for one half open. And there, by that window, their friend Dr. Jekyll sat like a man who had been made captive by his own thoughts. His face was drawn and weary. He confessed to being very low, and feared the air as if it would betray him. Then, unnerving both the men below, his expression changed to sudden terror. He thrust the window down and left them with a mystery that tasted like an omen. Both walked in silence away, the city's evening hum returning around them like a distant tide. Time passed, and a sense of dread settled in the house again. Poole, Jekyll's faithful servant, came to Utterson one night with a fear that sat in his voice like a hard stone. The doctor had been kept, by his own word, to the cabinet over the laboratory. For days, there had been knocking at the door, demands for powders and tinctures, and then a sudden, harried desire to have them returned because they were impure. The household had been on edge. Poole had seen a figure run in the theater and vanish like a frightened thing into the cabinet. Once the figure had thrown up a mask to his face. More than that, the voice that answered when Utterson called was not Jekyll's. It was lower, crueler, and the butler swore that the master he had served for 2 decades was now absent. They resolved to force the door. Poole, with trembling courage, fetched an axe. Utterson took a poker and set their small party at wait in the theater. The wind that night had a sharpness that tugged at their collars, and the houses about them were wrapped in the hush of late hours. Yet, within that stillness, the sound of a footfall went up and down behind the red baize of the cabinet. A slow, unsettling pace, like the measured breathing of a restless sleeper. When Utterson demanded that the door be opened, the voice that answered begged for mercy. It was not Jekyll's voice. The sound in it carried both childish panic and a feral hissing. At the order to break in, the axe struck the door 4 times, and the 5th blow brought the frame down with a finality that seemed to hush the whole room. The sudden silence was the kind that holds its breath. There, in the lamplight, lay Edward Hyde, contorted and strange, but clearly the body that had been sought and feared. In his hand, a smashed phial told of poison and self-destruction. Even as the men around him stood aghast, Utterson and Poole searched the house for Jekyll. The drawers and cupboards and dark closets bore dust and had not been used in years. The cellar was filled with the surgeon's old lumber. There was no sign of Jekyll. The key to the by-street door lay on the flagstone, rusted and broken, as if it had been stamped upon by some desperate pressure. On the business table of the cabinet lay an envelope bearing Utterson's own name. He opened it to find papers in Jekyll's handwriting. There was one final, stark note. Jekyll seemed to have gone, or to have been taken, but he left behind the instructions that would guide Utterson's understanding. The packet also included a will now naming Utterson himself as beneficiary should Jekyll die, and several sealed enclosures from Dr. Lanyon to be opened upon Jekyll's death or disappearance, and a longer, heavier confession. Utterson, with the calm duty of a man whose trade is to weigh facts, took the papers home and read. And as he read, the last cogs of the puzzle slowly turned. Dr. Lanyon's narrative came first, a stranger's chronicle of the night he had borne witness to a transformation. Lanyon was a man of bold temper and practical thinking. He had been called by a small, unnatural visitor, a man with a face and manner that made Lanyon uneasy. The visitor asked Lanyon, with pleading urgency, to secure from Jekyll's cabinet a particular drawer, and then to meet a messenger at midnight. Lanyon, though he feared Jekyll's oddities, carried out the task. The drawer contained powders and a small phial of a red, pungent liquid. That night, the small man returned and mixed a potion. The chemicals steamed and sang and changed color as a kind of private theater. The visitor drank it. Lanyon watched, horrified, as the man changed before his eyes in shape, in expression, until the very change was like a rebuke to the natural world. Where first stood a little mean man, there emerged Henry Jekyll. The transformation was as if one garment were shed and another assumed. Lanyon's nerves were shattered by the sight. He could not reconcile the matter with his practice. He never recovered from the horror. The tale he told Utterson was simple in fact and devastating in meaning. He had watched a living metamorphosis and had seen Jekyll and Hyde as two faces of the same life. Then, for the longest and most intimate confession, there was Jekyll's own statement. Here, in his own words, the doctor unburdened the deepest of his secret sorrows. He spoke of a childhood secure in fortune and opportunity, a life of learning, and a mind that loved both knowledge and the good opinion of others. From an early age, however, Dr. Jekyll admitted he had lived a divided life in his quiet pleasures, a careful gentleman who moored his public self to honor and did not expose the private indulgences that to him seemed at odds with the facade of respectability. He loved both sides of his nature with a fierce intensity, the respectable scholar and the secret appetite that wanted release. He told how, in his laboratory, he had pursued an idea, an experiment born of a wish to separate the opposing strands of human character into two distinct and manageable lives. Jekyll explained in gentle and painful detail how he had found that certain chemical compounds, salts and tinctures, altered the way his sense of self clung to his body. One night, after much thought and preparation, he drank a potion that shook his whole being as if the roots of him were being pulled loose. For a time, after agonizing physical reactions, there came a new sensation, a quickening, a reckless freedom. He felt younger, lighter, and with a dangerous clarity of appetite. From the glass and the change in his staircase, there emerged Edward Hyde, a man smaller than Jekyll, leaner and less practiced in life's responsibilities, yet possessed of a concentrated capacity for selfishness and cruelty. Dr. Jekyll marveled and at first took pleasure in the escape. Hyde was wholly evil, while Jekyll remained, in his own mind, wholly honorable, a separation that felt like both relief and triumph. At first, the experiment seemed a controlled liberty. Jekyll would, as the mood took him, drink the potion and be given over to Hyde's private appetites. Then, after his indulgence, he would drink again and return to his life of usefulness. He set up a house for Hyde, engaged a discreet housekeeper, and even made legal arrangements to preserve his affairs if anything should happen. The balance seemed manageable. Jekyll, as he put it, could walk in public with his face set toward goodness and slip, at will, into the other life. He could thus live two lives in one and spare his reputation the blemishes he wished to keep private. Yet what began as a cunning plan gradually betrayed itself. The smaller being, Hyde, seemed to be a compact, intense embodiment of the darker side of Jekyll's nature. He was freed from many of the checks that held men to ordinary decencies. In Hyde's hands, the appetite for mischief deepened into cruelty. Jekyll found, with a rare and terrible astonishment, that his other self could act in ways that he dared not contemplate when he wore his own face. The pleasures taken in Hyde's life were coarse and immediate when they were followed by the return to Jekyll, regret, and a strong desire for reparation rose in him. But the axe had already been done. The inner double life slowly unbalanced the man. He took delight in Hyde's short, sharp satisfactions, and yet, as one might imagine, found the moral cost intolerable. Each transformation was a kind of loss. Each return to his other self left him more drained, and the drug that had seemed to grant liberation began to show its toll. Once the experiment yielded a misstep. After a night of Hyde's revelry, Jekyll awoke as Hyde and found the bed and room Jekyll usually inhabited unfamiliar. He detected the parts of Hyde's body in his own limbs. The hand was knuckled, hairy, and of a dusky aspect. He had lost, without taking any draught, the control to determine which self would inhabit the day. The change, which at first required a potion, had begun to assert itself without warning. Fear swept over him like a cold wave. He managed to resume his true self with courage and haste, but the tremor in the mechanism of his being could not be ignored. He had started something that might have its own life. After such losses of control, Jekyll sought to lock Hyde away, to live solely as himself. For a time he succeeded, and for a season he was filled with industry and charity. He felt the quiet rewards of virtue and took comfort in the warmth of other people. But the old appetite did not die. It only crouched, waiting. Once more he drank the potion. Once more Hyde returned. Hyde rose to heights of appetite and degraded energy because he was free of conscience. He did not see himself as others did, nor care how his acts would injure them. Jekyll watched in horror as Hyde's appetite grew into a destructive force. The double life had begun to create a new inner law. Each self remembered their shared life, but Hyde felt less responsibility and more freedom. Gradually, the control that Jekyll could exercise weakened. The potion failed at times and required more to produce the desired results. The very mechanism of transformation was becoming unstable. When Hyde was the more frequent presence, mischief thickened into tragedy. One dark evening, Hyde struck down Sir Danvers Carew and beat him to death in the street, an act of blind, disproportionate violence. Jekyll, awaking from Hyde's actions with horror and shame, would seek to make amends for the ruin his other self had wrought. He burned letters, destroyed robes, and anything that might tie him to Hyde's presence. He tried to satisfy the hunger in quieter ways. he attempted to hold to a life of useful work and penance. But the strain of constantly countering the other self was immense. The little man that sprang so violently and suddenly from within him had grown in courage and cunning. He would menace Jekyll with his existence and his appetite. In desperation, Jekyll sought to supply himself with more of the rare salts and powders that had once enabled the ease of change. He had always bought a particular ingredient from a distant firm, and for a while the supply was ample. But then the supply was exhausted. A new batch did not work. Jekyll tried again and again. His limbics and nerves, already worn thin by the strain, could not be coaxed back by an inferior compound. The transformations would not come when he needed them. The peril of being trapped in Hyde's nature became a real and present threat. One night, when Hyde's presence overwhelmed him and he could not return by will, there was no choice but to seek others' help. He turned to Dr. Lanyon, asking him, through the manipulation of handwriting and deceit, to obtain the proper drawer, and then, at midnight, to hand it to a messenger. Lanyon, though alarmed, complied. The messenger returned later that night and drank the mixture in Lanyon's room. He transformed before Lanyon's eyes into Henry Jekyll himself. The shock of this sight broke Lanyon's health. He could not reconcile such unnatural morphing of identity with his scientific beliefs. The horror shook him at the very core, and he never recovered. The final page of Jekyll's long confession is where he sits at last, with the knowledge that he can no longer safely alternate between selves. He writes of the day when his stock of the original powder ran out. He had exhausted the supply he had relied upon for so long, and in his panic, he remixed the draft from ingredients whose subtle chemistry he did not fully know. The potion did not take. He drank and felt only half the metamorphosis. He realized that the boundary between them had thinned dangerously. His better nature was losing hold. Hyde's inclination threatened to permanently supplant Jekyll's. In the end, he saw the moral and bodily ruin closing upon them both. He sat to write, under the dull and whispering presence of his last powder, and committed to paper what all of his years had taught him. That man is not truly one, but truly two. That our nature is a compound of contrary impulses that we may never wholly control, and that attempts to cleave the human into halves can lead only to an even more bitter union. He asked not for pity, but for truth. He owned his brilliant and foolish experiments, and admitted, with humility and pain, that in trying to divorce the monstrous part from his life, he had freed it instead. The last part of his confession is not a plea, but an accounting. He lists the ways he had erred, and the moments when his desire to escape responsibility had betrayed him into a deeper woe. So it was that Utterson, with the relief of having at last read the full account, laid down the paper in the hush of his office and breathed a long sigh. He had known his friend's worth and the goodness of his life, and the confession, so clear in its detail and so raw in its sorrow, had given him new cause for a gentleness that time had not taken away. The story's end is neither triumphant nor wholly tragic. It is a quiet lesson about human frailty and the yearning to be whole. What is left behind is a still house and a set of sealed papers, and the memory of a man who sought in science the ability to live without shame and found, instead, that shame has its part in the weave of a moral life. Now, as you let these last sentences fall soft upon you, let the bustle of the city fade a little. Imagine Utterson walking home through lanes made gentle by lamplight, the hush of the night draped about him like a soft cape. Imagine him pausing at his own threshold, mindful of the way old friends sometimes bear burdens they do not show. Imagine Jekyll's rooms returning to quiet, the chemical presses closed, the little things set straight as if in readiness for better weather. Above all, imagine the care of one man who watched another with steady compassion, a small comprehension that even when folly takes the reins, friendship and honor tend to the quiet, necessary things. There is a softness in the way the city breathes after such disturbances. Lamps keep their warming watch, doors close with the ordinary click of life continuing, and in the larger sweep of time, men and women will go on making small courtesies, tending their gardens, answering the calls of kindness. The story we have walked through together is a lesson gently told, that we carry within us contradictions that will never be wholly excised, that our reach must be tempered by humility, and that those who love us, friends like Utterson, servants like Poole, will act with steadiness when storms rise. Turn now toward sleep and imagine the soothing shawl of night folding over the city. Picture the lamplight steady like an old promise. Let your breath slow as you think of the honest, quiet steps of men like Utterson, who keep watch not with accusation, but with a quiet, repairing care. And remember that every human heart carries some strange chamber where light and shadow meet. In time, with patience and humility, we can tend that inner room with gentleness and find a kind of peace. Good night. Let the calm of the quiet streets carry you into sleep, and may your own thoughts find rest in the tender patience of the ordinary world.